Hey, I'm Ryan, and I'm going to review the Markwell X Wide Calligraphy Paint Marker. I picked this marker up at a local art store because it was unique, and because I haven't used a calligraphy marker as wide as the Markwell X Wide and was excited to try it. I got this marker as a general artist's tool to see how it functions in different settings and to determine if it's a worthwhile marker to buy as an artist's tool. So, what is the Markwell X Wide? It's a normal pump-action valve-fed marker with a 2-inch wide felt calligraphy nib. But what does that mean? A pump-action or valve-fed marker is a marker with a barrel reservoir of liquid paint with an actuating valve that controls the amount of paint that flows into the marker nib. Open the valve by depressing the nib, pulling paint from the reservoir into the nib and onto your surface. The Markwell X Wide comes stock with a 2-inch wide by 3/8 of an inch thick felt nib with a rounded top and flat edges. When this marker is new, the nib will be completely dry and void of paint. To get it started, after fully shaking and agitating the paint inside, turn the marker upside down and depress the nib over and over until the paint flow is adequate, which may take a while. The reservoir on this marker holds up to 25 milliliters of paint and comes filled with an alcohol-based paint formula, as opposed to either water or oil-based. The stock paint has no staining qualities, but is said to be highly opaque and weather or fade resistant. The reservoir chamber is refillable after removing the collar piece from the marker. The collar is reverse threaded, so lefty-tighty and righty-loosey. I will usually put electrical tape around the collar and body seam on the marker to stop any leaks. However, I had no issues with these markers leaking at the seam. Alright, let's see it in action. One thing with this marker that stood out to me as a potential problem, even before using it, would be getting paint to flow evenly throughout the entire marker nib. Just like a standard 15mm by 8mm pump action marker, the valve on this marker will only flow paint into the center of the nib, which isn't a problem for a small nib marker, but I expected this marker to have trouble with even flow and distribution of paint throughout the nib during use. I found this to be a problem when using the marker. Lines would begin to streak on the edges, and the cover then wasn't very uniform. When trying to reflood the nib with paint and saturate the whole way across, I had to waste paint because the center became oversaturated and would puddle up before paint would fully reach the edges of the nib. In addition, the marker didn't come completely full of paint. The body of the marker holds around 25 milliliters of paint, but after opening one up, I found that it was roughly 2/3 full, which was disappointing. I found the marker's color to be disappointing as well. I had purchased black, the only color that was in stock at my store, and it didn't quite live up to what I was hoping for. Although the paint came out very black, it wasn't the deep, rich black that I was hoping for, and had found in similar markers, such as the Montana calligraphy marker. However, the black was certainly opaque and covered other colors very well. This is not an all-purpose marker. There are strict limits as to what the marker can and can't do. The Markwell X Wide is only for smooth surfaces. Using it on rough surfaces, like brick, concrete, plywood, rusty metal, etc., will tear apart the felt nib and won't yield proper flow from the marker. Due to the wide nib, this marker does well over smooth surfaces even with small bumps or indents, much better than a smaller nib marker would. However, it can still only be pushed so far. The Markwell won't fare so well on wet surfaces either. The alcohol-based paint formula will not set on a wet, oily, or dirty surface and can be washed off with water before the paint dries. Luckily, on a dry surface, the paint will be dry to the touch in just under 10 minutes. Another restriction with this marker is that you should not remove the regulator valve. The valve can be easily removed, opening a path from the nib directly to the paint reservoir, allowing the paint to flow freely out rather than having to depress the valve. With any Markwell marker, the nib is too porous to be directly against the paint reservoir, to the point that if you let the marker stay sideways, paint will continuously pour from the barrel through the nib into the cap, rendering it useless. There are also a lot of positives with the Markwell X Wide. For instance, after the nib was fully saturated with paint, the Markwell X Wide has beautiful line quality. When the paint is spread evenly and uniform on a surface, it has a stunning gloss or sheen, which can be a desirable effect. The wide but flat nib offers a huge range of effects and line sizes, helping this marker to be a diverse tool in the pocket or smock of any artist. The cap system for the Markwell X Wide is in fact one of my favorite things about it. The cap attaches via 2 single-toothed flanges on each side, which is far superior to a standard round snap-on marker cap. The double flange system lets the user take the cap off vertically and without splatter, as opposed to a round marker cap that will fling paint out as the cap is pulled off. The alcohol-based paint is non-toxic and doesn't contain xylene, making this a great indoor studio marker, even for small spaces. The Markwell X Wide is easy enough to refill, but only with other alcohol-based paints, like this salt-tip paint for example, not with this acrylic water-based paint. Putting the wrong kind of paint in your marker can not only waste the ink that you have inside, but it could ruin your marker's regulator and nib as well. The formula inside the Markwell X Wide is opaque and fade resistant, but as with most paints, mineral spirits or denatured alcohol cut through it fairly easily after it has dried. Perhaps most importantly, this marker is fun to use. It's very satisfying to leave a big bold marker stroke, or a complex calligraphy letter, making use of the marker's broad versatility. A 2-inch wide marker will not be without drawbacks, and for what the Markwell X Wide is, I think it's a solid marker. It manages hurdles nearly as well as any other calligraphy-style marker would. Although the stock paint formula is less than perfect, it holds up well and can be refilled with many varieties of paint. This marker offers a lot of unique effects that only a calligraphy-style marker could give you, which is why every artist should keep one in their toolkit. I had paid $6.99 for this marker, and I would recommend it to any artist who would use this marker as a long-term creative tool. I would rate this marker a 3.75 out of 5 as a creative tool, and I would buy it again.